Happy July 4th to you and your family. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're going to be able to barbecue some hot dogs and hamburgers, maybe even some baby back ribs. I know I'm looking forward to the rest of the day, and we've got two of our three sons here, so we hope to be able to celebrate in a grand fashion. Today's show is brought to you by our studio sponsor, Bone Frog Coffee. It's a company founded to help vets and to produce really good tasting coffee. We have a beautiful studio, and we appreciate Bone Frog helping sponsor it. We've even got the glass cage back there where producer Anthony hangs out. And so we are also brought to you by two other sponsors, namely Nessa's Hemp. We'll talk about that more later. And also Masculine Essentials, an important part of every man's start to the day. So thank you for joining us. And we've got a packed show for you today. We're going to hear from Elliot Greenberg. He is the owner of Masculine Men. We had a great conversation about today's young people, and they're starting to gravitate back towards thinking about the way they're looking, both in their physical appearance, their hygiene, and the clothing that they wear. They call it looks maxing, and the whole goal is to ascend. So we talked about that with Elliot Greenberg, and then we're going to have Jay Ford. He's the author of Rustling of the Sycamore. So, folks, today, I really gave a lot of thought to what to do with today's show. And the kind of knee-jerk reflexive reaction was, let's get some veterans, some heroes that we could have on the show and really talk about the 4th of July and what it means. That's compelling. The fact of the matter is, on reflection, I just decided that you're going to have opportunities to hear that, receive that information from so many sources, including the 250th anniversary celebration in Washington and other parts of the country, and speakers galore. So at the risk of being a downer, which is not my intent, I've decided to go in a different direction. And I'm going to talk to you about some really serious stuff. And many of these are recurring themes on the truth. But I think that it is of such an importance. And I think that the 4th of July, whereas I'm not intending to in any way interfere with the celebration, but it's an appropriate time to reflect on where we are as a country and how can we sustain our country well into the future. So I've titled today's monologue, Can a Moral Nation Survive an Immoral Government? I believe the answer is yes, but only if moral men refuse to remain silent. Only if we see the pattern clearly and act upon it. So I'm going to discuss some controversial and maybe even uncomfortable topics today, so I can ask you to simply adopt an open mind. Now, a lot of these things we've talked about many times before on The Truth, but never all in one sitting. So it's going to be a little long, but stick with me. I think we've got a pretty good monologue for you today with lots of clips from important sources. So you can watch us now on social media platforms that you may gravitate towards. We're on Getter, Rumble, YouTube, X, Facebook, and Instagram. So if you use any of those platforms, you can go there right now, and you will be able to watch the video production of today's Truth, complete with video of the clips that we're going to air. If you otherwise would just like to listen to us on the radio or across the web or on the apps, you're welcome to do that too. We come to you every Saturday and Sunday on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We are also on cdm.press. They take our feed and redistribute it on their social media platforms, which include many of the ones I just mentioned. You can also download on the App Store the John Fredericks radio app and listen to us on your smartphone anywhere in the world, really, if you have a worldwide web connection. That's otherwise known as the internet. But on Getter, which I particularly like, you can interact with us in the live chat, and you can tell me what you think. I would really like to hear from you, actually, during the broadcast today. And we'll read your comments, respond to them if we have time. And we'll certainly reflect on them after the broadcast. So join us on Getter if you would like. Look for the live button, search for John Gordon Truth. We're right there waiting on you. So let's look at this notion of a moral people against an immoral government. Throughout Scripture, God's people have faced this question. The Hebrews under Pharaoh, the early Christians under Rome, the faithful under tyranny, and in each case, the answer was the same. Moral people must stand, must resist, and must not be willing or allowed to be overcome by evil. What I'm going to talk to you about today, ladies and gentlemen, most of it, if not all, is pure, unadulterated evil. So let's start with a familiar topic on the truth, and that is the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Many people today still rely on the government's narrative, especially the Warren Commission, which we now know is a complete and utter farce. How do we know that? Where is the most tangible evidence of that? Well, I'll tell you. In 1979, and the mainstream media, damn them, don't report this. But in 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations completed its investigation into President Kennedy's death. They used acoustic analysis of police recordings. The committee concluded with a high probability, with over a 95% certainty, that there were two gunmen in Dealey Plaza on that fateful day. This is the United States Congress in a bipartisan commission concluded that. We're not told that when the mainstream media talks about the assassination. They only talk about Oswald. Two gunmen means a conspiracy. Two gunmen mean the official narrative, the Warren Report, is false. Robert Kennedy Jr., the President John Kennedy's nephew, has stated publicly that the evidence is overwhelming that the CIA was involved in his uncle's assassination. So does Tucker Carlson. Kennedy Jr. has said that his father's first call after JFK's assassination was to a CIA official, and he asked, "Did your people do this?" The forensic evidence presents serious questions. Lee Harvey Oswald had no paraffin on his hands or body an hour and a half after the assassination, a test that would have indicated if he had in fact fired a rifle. His fingerprints were absent on the rifle that was allegedly used. His fingerprints were absent in the sniper's nest. I'm here to tell you that if Lee Harvey Oswald was tried by a jury of his peers, there is no way in my mind, as having been a member of the bar since 1979, that he could have been convicted of murder. I think that the evidence of his innocence is overwhelming. Much of it is true, admittedly, uh, circumstantial, but nevertheless, the volume of circumstantial evidence is significant. So let me give you another little tidbit. There was a guy named Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was vice president of the United States then, and he was under investigation in the state of Texas for illegally claiming cotton subsidies with a business associate of his. So the Commissioner of Agriculture was actually investigating LBJ and Billy Saul's Estes, the business associate. And so one day at his golf course, the agricultural commissioner was gunned down in cold blood. There were many eyewitnesses, and it wasn't too long after his killing, his death, his murder, that a guy named Mac Wallace was arrested. Now, Mac Wallace was known to have a relationship with Lyndon Baines Johnson. In fact, people considered Mac Wallace LBJ's cleanup guy, the guy who handled the dirty stuff. Well, Mac Wallace was convicted of murder by 12 men and women in a jury trial. Guess whose fingerprint was in the sniper's nest from JFK's assassination? Mac Wallace. So why does this matter? Because Lyndon Baines Johnson, in that investigation, that he basically, the belief is that he had the agricultural commissioner bumped off. And when Mac Wallace was convicted, the judge, who also had ties to LBJ, released him from custody and rendered that his sentence was limited to time served. So a guy that was convicted of murder by 12 men and women in an unanimous verdict was allowed to walk out of the courthouse. And then sometime later, his fingerprint shows up in the school book depository in the sniper's nest. I'll let you connect the dots. Oswald said when he was captured, "I'm just a patsy." And he was killed before his trial. The case was closed, and the American people were told to accept the official story. Let's look at clip 2. Did we miss clip 1, Indy or Anthony? Oh, darn. All right, well, what was clip 1? All right, let's roll Tucker's take on the JFK assassination, and then we'll go and run clip 2.
Did the CIA have a hand in the murder of John F. Kennedy, an American president? And here's the reply we received verbatim. Quote, "The answer is yes. I believe they were involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake." It's hard to imagine a more jarring response than that. Again, this is not a, quote, conspiracy theorist that we spoke to. Not even close. This is someone with direct knowledge of the information that once again is being withheld from the American public. And the answer we received was unequivocal. Yes, the CIA was involved in the assassination of the president.
Now, have been told that we have to accept the official story, and if you don't, you were labeled a fringe conspiratorialist. People like Jim Garrison, who was a prosecutor in New Orleans who investigated the Kennedy assassination, was ridiculed and maligned. And Mark Lane, an author who wrote A Rush to Judgment, was similarly discredited and labeled a publicity seeker. Then, of course, the journalist Dorothy Kilgallen. She died after having interviewed Jack Ruby in his jail cell in Dallas. She came home to New York and told her friend that she was going to blow the lid off the JFK assassination She was found dead the next morning in her uh, apartment in New York. She was dressed for dinner with her makeup on, lying not in her bed, but in the bed of her guest bedroom with barbiturates strewn around her. Kind of reminds you of Marilyn Monroe, doesn't it? All of her notes of her interview and her research on the JFK assassination were gone, never to have been seen since. Now, here's what a United States Army colonel had to say about this. And he, by the way, was Colin Powell's chief of staff. Roll two.
I was at Baylor University at that time, and I remember when the announcement was made, I was absolutely stunned. Me and my roommate could barely talk for about a half an hour. The president's just been shot, not too far from us. We were in Waco. And then we were on the TV, and we watched this guy walk up to Ruby and shoot him right there. And we, at that moment, Bob and I said to ourselves, this stinks. This really stinks.
Yeah. When the lone gunman kills the lone gunman, they're probably not lone gunmen.
Nah, you got it.
Well, it was a dark day in America. I think it was the day America lost its innocence. I think it is the day that we began a steep moral decline, and we're still, I think, paying for it because we have conveyed to every bureaucrat, government worker, that if you have power, you can literally commit murder in this country and get away with it with impunity. Now, here's how Tucker sums it all up.
Now, some people will not be surprised to hear that. They suspected it all along. But no matter how you feel about or what you thought about the Kennedy assassination, pause to consider what this means. It means that within the U.S. government, there are forces wholly beyond democratic control. These forces are more powerful than the elected officials that supposedly oversee them. These forces can affect election outcomes. They can even hide their complicity in the murder of an American president. In other words, they can do pretty much anything they want. They constitute a government within a government, mocking by their very existence the idea of democracy. As cynical as we have become after 30 years of watching government officials ignore the voters who employ them, we were shocked to learn this. It's not acceptable. Americans have trusted their government less with every passing year since the killing of John F. Kennedy. Maybe this is why.
Well, there's no doubt. And that plays directly into my thesis that it has only gotten worse. And John F. Kennedy was really just the beginning of what has become a long line of tragedies, disasters that, for me, reek of intel having their fingerprints all over it. What am I talking about? Let's contemplate the death of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Just 5.5 years after I witnessed Walter Cronkite coming on the national news and pronouncing JFK dead, I walked out to my parents' car early in the morning, and 5.5 years later, and started the car, turned on the radio, and I was shocked to learn that the night before, Bobby Kennedy had been killed in a hotel in Los Angeles just after having won that state's nomination for president of the United States. He won in a clean sweep. He got all the delegates. That was the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. We are told that Sirhan Sirhan acted alone, according to the official narrative. Sirhan that night was in fact in the kitchen where Kennedy was killed, and he carried an 8-shot revolver. But here's where things get dicey. Ballistic evidence tells a far different story. Witnesses report that more than 8 shots were fired in that kitchen, up to as many as 13 shots, according to many accounts. Sirhan's gun, remember, only contained 8 bullets. And get this, all 8 bullets were recovered and accounted for. None of them struck Bobby Kennedy. If more than 8 shots were fired, there was a second gunman. The fatal shot came from behind Bobby Kennedy. Sirhan was in front of him and was wrestled to the ground by bystanders. Bobby Kennedy's closest friend, Paul Schrade, who stood beside him during the shooting, was himself struck by a bullet, and he said unequivocally that the shots came from behind, not from Sirhan's position. Now, here is Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s summary of his dad's own death.
The second, and Paul Schrade, incidentally, I tell you, the punchline, called me and said, I don't know, 10 years ago, and said, I want you to come to my house and read the autopsy report on your dad. This, you can imagine, the last thing in the world that I ever wanted to do. But I couldn't say no to him because he had taken a bullet for my father. And he was a good friend, so I went and talked to him. And he showed me the autopsy report and then, a lot of other information. But essentially, after reading that, it was impossible for me to believe that Sirhan had killed my dad, and I'll tell you why. Sirhan fired 2 shots at my father. The first one hit my father, put Paul Schrade in the head. The second one hit a door jamb, a wooden door jamb behind my father, and was later removed from that door jamb by the LAPD. At that point, he was grabbed. It was a crowded room. There's 77 people in the room, in the kitchen. And he was standing in front of a steam table. My father was 5 feet in front of him. My father never turned his back. All kinds of eyewitnesses. He was grabbed by 6 men, including Rayford Johnson, who I've talked to about it, Rosie Greer, who was part of the fearsome foursome, the Oakland Raiders, and 4 other guys, men, and they piled on top of him. Rayford Johnson said to me, Sirhan is a little tiny guy, and almost feeble looking. I mean, today he's feeble looking. And I spent about 3 hours with him in jail, sitting in the prison with him. These men took his hand, the first thing they did, and pointed away from my father. But Rayford Johnson said, toward the other end of the room, Rayford Johnson said to me, Rayford Johnson was the decathlon champion in 1960, a huge guy, super strong, and he said, this little man had superhuman strength, and I could not get the gun away from him. And he emptied the revolver. It was a revolver. He emptied it. He had 8 shots in it, and he never reloaded. And he shot 6 times in the other direction. All 6 of those bullets hit people. 5 of them, one of them went through one guy's clothing, and another, it also wounded his leg. He hit people in the stomach, we know what happened to every one of those bullets, right? That's 8 bullets. We know what happened to every one of them. My father, the autopsy report shows, was shot 4 times from behind. And they were contact shots. One of them did not hurt him, but went through the shoulder pad of his jacket. The other ones all hit him. And the last one, which was the most fatal, was right behind his ear, an inch from his ear, but with the barrel touching his skin. And the other ones were all contact shots, meaning that they were within probably a half an inch of his skin and clothing, and they left carbon tattoos on his skin. And Sirhan was never behind my father. And there was many, many eyewitnesses.
Well, yet another case was closed. Another inconvenient Kennedy was removed from power, and the narrative was established. We were told to believe it, and if we didn't, we were right-wing fringe conspiratorialist. It wasn't long after Bobby Kennedy was struck down that America lost another treasure. Martin Luther King Jr. He advocated for peace and desegregation and harmony. Well, we've been told that James Earl Ray was the lone assassin on April the 4th, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, on the balcony of a hotel where MLK had just spent the night. And, but what the mainstream media does not tell you is that in 1999, the King family brought a civil case in Memphis, Tennessee. After 4 weeks of testimony and over 70 witnesses, a jury of 12 men and women rendered their unanimous verdict and concluded that Dr. King was not the victim of James Earl Ray, but rather a conspiracy that involved Lloyd Jowers and others, including government assets. The civil jury verdict was clear. The King family has stood behind it. Coretta Scott King, his now late widow, stated publicly, "There is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband." Yet the official narrative persists to this day. James Earl Ray acted alone. A jury of 12 men and women heard the evidence and said otherwise, but the government story remains in place. When we interviewed Dr. Alveda King, Dr. King's niece, right here on The Truth, she had this to say about her uncle's assassination. Roll tape 5.
It was just like there was no lone killer of my dad, Reverend A.D. King, who was killed in 1969 and thrown into a swimming pool. There was no water in his lungs, and yet they say he drowned. So with the three, Martin Luther King Jr. shot, A.D. King choked and thrown in the pool, Mama King shot. And they would like for us to believe that those were all random acts, totally separate by crazy people. A woman stabbed Martin Luther King Jr. in 1958 in Madison Square Garden in the chest, a Black woman. The man who shot my grandmother was Black. So, yeah. So all of this is connected and related.
Dr. King's words have the ring of truth. All right, let's move on to another U.S. tragedy. On September the 11th, 2001, the Twin Towers collapsed in New York City. The Twin Towers were struck by aircraft. But what has not been talked about or really studied very closely in the public domain is that there was a third building that fell several hours after the Twin Towers collapsed. It was known as Building 7. A 47-story office tower collapsed without being struck by any airplanes. It burned for less than an hour before falling into its own perfectly outlined footprint. Well, Congressman Kurt Weldon, who served on the House Armed Services Committee, is a former firefighter and had been in Congress for, I think, 10 or 12 years before they ran him out because he questioned this official narrative. He has concluded unequivocally that Building 7 was brought down in a controlled demolition. He is joined by other firefighters, architects, and structural engineers who have examined the evidence. They reached the same conclusion. The free fall collapse in the manner that it did was most likely an implosion. The way the building fell into itself, these are not consistent with structural failures from fire alone. Buildings burn for hours around the world without collapsing. Yet this building, which burned for an hour, collapsed perfectly. The steel was sold for scrap and shipped overseas almost immediately, removing the evidence. And no serious investigation was permitted to challenge the official conclusion. Now here's former Congressman Kirk Weldon.
Congressman, what part of the evidence that you saw in the documentary 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out hit you the most, was the most compelling for you, or
Well,
two or three of them?
the visuals of the collapse of the Building 7 obviously was just overwhelming. I never paid attention to it. And I was there. I was at ground zero within 2 days of the event happening. The visual evidence that you have, and the fact that they never allowed any forensic work to be done on the steel, that the steel was moved so quickly where it could not be analyzed. I never knew that. I never realized that. That message from that New York official on the 78th floor, that's very personal to me, because I understand that situation, being on the floor and saying, okay, we can handle this. And then an entire building collapses? No, that's not, I'm not an engineer, but that's not common sense. And there's something else at play here, and we need to know what that is. We need to understand it. If we're going to be a nation based upon the truths of this nation, we need to make sure that the facts are as they should be.
Amen. And my simple question to our listeners is that if you accept that Kurt Weldon and others are correct and that Building 7 resulted from a controlled demolition, then what else might be true? Well, Jeffrey Epstein is the story that won't go away. He operated for decades with apparent protection from federal authorities. When a South Florida prosecutor, Alexander Acosta, was asked during his Senate confirmation hearing why he had given Epstein such a lenient plea deal, the account emerged. He related that he was told that Epstein belonged to Intel and to leave it alone. Here's Tucker Carlson's take. Let's roll clip 7.
His previous cellmate, he said, tried to kill him. Then he was alone, and then the cameras, for some reason, were turned off, and the two guards were supposed to be watching were asleep, and clearly one of the other inmates killed him. And we know this for a bunch of different reasons, including the fact that somebody dressed him in different clothes before bringing him down to the prison infirmary.
But I'm sorry,
et cetera,
there's
et cetera,
no
et cetera.
evidence of this, right?
Oh, it's definitely evidence of it, for sure, because the story that they are telling
Well, that's
is
not the
inconsistent.
official story, no?
No, the official story is that he hung himself with a bed sheet. But the medical examiner who was hired by his brother, who was in the autopsy, said conclusively, having done autopsies on suicide victims in prison throughout New York State for 40 years, that this guy was strangled. That is not a ligature mark consistent with being hung. That is someone being strangled with the cord to his CPAP machine. Meanwhile, the medical examiner who wrote the official report concluded that it was, quote, inconclusive. If you're interested in this, there's an awful lot of responsible reporting on this topic, and I could go on for hours. But the point is, it was obvious to me that he was murdered. It was obvious to me that Trump's attorney general knew he was murdered and that he lied about it. And I've said that in public many times. He's threatened to sue me, and I hope he does, because I'd love to go through discovery on that.
We'll get right back to the show after this brief word from our sponsor, Masculine Man Essentials. Look, most deodorants on the shelf are full of aluminum, parabens, and synthetic junk. Masculine Man Essentials goes at it differently. All natural ingredients, built for men, and it actually holds up through the whole day long. Whether you're at the office, at the gym, in traffic, or just getting home for the night, try Masculine Man Essentials. I've been using it, and I can tell you, it's the real deal. Head to masculinemanessentials.com, grab yourself a 2-pack or a 4-pack, use the promo code TRUTH at the checkout to save on your first order, and the link is in today's show notes. As you know, we don't put our name on anything that we haven't tried and believe in. So when I tell you about Nessa's hemp, I want you to listen up. Nessa's Hemp is a Chicago-based company that makes hemp, and it was founded by Anessa. And what she's built is really something. We're talking about clean, high-quality hemp products with no gimmicks, just real ingredients, real transparency, with real results. Whether you're dealing with stress, sleep issues, inflammation, or you just want to add something natural to your wellness routine, Nessa's Hemp has something to offer you. Head over to nessahemp.com, that's N-E-S-A-S hemp.com, and check out what they've got. Use our promo code TRUTH for a discount just by being our listener.
That is the beginning of the actual scandal. Jeffrey Epstein was indicted federally in August of 2019 for the same crimes he'd been convicted of in Florida in 2006. Why did they do that? Well, it's to get him back from France. And they arrested him at Teterboro Private Airport in New Jersey. He goes directly to detention. A month later, he's dead. Why? Well, it's very obvious to me, and I'm not the only person who thinks this, trust me, that he was, this was done with the knowledge of governments,
So then,
including the U.S. government.
Well, I think that's pretty scandalous. What do you think? A man who trafficked human beings, who exploited children, who received institutional protection because he was deemed useful to government intelligence. The pattern repeats. Power protects those who serve it, even when those people commit unspeakable crimes. But I don't let this go so easily or get by with such a simple explanation. I think it went far deeper than just Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, if he was working for Intel, why would they allow him to do it? He had cameras in all of his houses. He had people from, very powerful people from around the globe visiting him. And he recorded them in, we believe, compromising positions. Evidently, there are thousands of hours of video that we have been denied access to view. And today with modern technology, you could blur out the victims, so there's no possibility of exposing them to further trauma. But what about the people who participated? Well, a lot of people want to know who those people were, and I think we do know who many of them were. But what I want to know, and what I continue to demand knowing, is who sponsored Jeffrey Epstein? Who did Epstein work for? Was he just engaged in blackmail for his own benefit? Or was he working on behalf of our own intel or possibly Mossad? The speculation abounds. But the patterns and the memes and the narratives are just too pat, and they're too similar across a variety of tragedies and events. Well, we can't talk about notable events without considering recent assassination attempts on President Trump. On July 13th, 2024, there was an assassination attempt on President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. In September 24th, there was another assassination attempt in West Palm Beach, Florida. Now, here are indisputable facts. The assassination attempts occurred. The official investigations reached their conclusions, but most like me who've bothered to look and look closely, just don't buy the official story. Put me solidly in that camp. So was Roger Stone, by the way. Here's what he had to say when we interviewed him on The Truth.
Almost immediately after the shooting, a source of mine who's in in Pennsylvania law enforcement called me on the phone and said that he believed that the shooter was not Thomas Matthew Crooks, but Matthew Urick, a man who had been arrested previously at an altercation at a Trump event in Pennsylvania. So I speculated about, I didn't say flatly that Urick was the shooter. I said a law enforcement source has contacted me arguing that Matthew Urick was the actual shooter.
It's a theory that I am open to receiving information about and have actually looked at pretty carefully. Zach DiGregorio on Wolves and Finance did an episode and an expose where he zeroed in on the body of the fallen shooter on top of the AGR building. That person clearly had visible scars on his ears. Thomas Matthew Crooks is not believed to have had scars, but Maxwell Urick did, because he used to wear gauges or previously wore gauges. He took those out. When his ears healed, they left scars. Maxwell Urick's parents, coincidentally, filed a missing persons report on him the day after Butler. To my knowledge, he has not been seen or heard from since. The curious thing to me is, and the troublesome thing, frankly, is when you think about it. Who's the person with the most direct stake in knowing the truth? He's the one who is not demanding answers. What does this tell us? Frankly, I don't know. We have a clip on that, Anthony? Okay. Well, contemplate that. Let's leave that for now. And let's turn our attention to another tragedy of overwhelming grief. On September the 10th, 2025, my wife and I, Helen, were enjoying lunch with our middle son when a news flash came over the television screen announcing Charlie Kirk had been shot. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about the assassination, all the things that don't add up. I'll just say this for the sake of time. But it's a similar storyline that we've been relating to the other events, just a different chapter and verse. And in the interest of time, we'll just show you a short clip from fellow YouTuber Jimmy Dore and his take on Tucker's death.
I mean, Charlie had started to have an awakening.
Oh, you think?
He had a lot younger than I had it.
Yeah.
And so that's why they had to kill him. And when I say they, I mean multiple. There was a conspiracy to kill him. It wasn't some guy, Tyler Robinson, with his grandpa's rifle, which was never fired, which is why they couldn't find that rifle. You have to swallow so much stuff to believe the story that the establishment is pushing for Charlie Kirk's assassination. Yeah. You have to think that this, first of all, a 30-06 bullet didn't take his head clean off or leave a drive-through window in the back of his neck. Somehow he had a miracle. His miracle bullet, remember that? Hey, can you give me an explanation of why his head didn't blow off without a miracle? Do you have an actual explanation? No. So, but it goes back to, so this guy gets to the campus, he drives all of a sudden he wakes up one day and goes, you know what, I'm going to commit the biggest public assassination in the last 60 years. He drives to the campus, he finds the open stairwell. It's open, nobody's there. He brings the gun up, but it's too big, so he has to take it apart and put it in his backpack. Still too big for his backpack, so he has to put it down his pant legs, is what they tell. But then if he did, he couldn't go up the steps because he couldn't bend his knees. So I don't know how he got it up there. Nobody will tell me. So he gets up there, and then he changes his clothes. He's up on top of that roof for 10 minutes. That's according to the governor. He was up there for 8 to 10 minutes. Nobody sees him. The cops don't see him. The $1 million security team doesn't see him. Nobody sees him except people in the crowd did see him. And they don't tell you that. People, just like in Butler, Pennsylvania, people in the crowd saw him. Guess who didn't see him? The cops, the local cops, the state cops, the Secret Service. People see him. So, and then he puts the gun together. He lines up the shot, puts a scope on it. By the way, if that scope was on it, he couldn't fire that gun because of the safe. Anyway, so he lines it up, takes the shot, hits it perfectly, takes the gun apart, leaves the screwdriver there, puts it under a towel, Spider-Man's his way off the top of a building, runs across campus with the gun apparently under a towel. Nobody sees this. He runs into the woods, puts the gun back together again without the screwdriver. He's a regular MacGyver, this guy. And then he hides the gun in the backyard of a house owned by Palantir. And if you think anything else besides that, you're a crazy hating conspiracy nut.
Well, we heard from Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson earlier in the show. He likewise had thoughts on Charlie's assassination.
You think about Charlie Kirk, for example, and what's happening right now with that assassination, which I can't even tell you what's happening. I don't even know. The FBI has been so unforthcoming, but I know. I told you, I'm a weapons guy. That did not happen the way they're saying it happened. And I doubt very seriously if that guy stuck a 30-06 down his pants leg and walked away.
So what do you make of all this? What emerges from these cases and patterns are repetitive similar events. When a person or a movement threatens institutional power, when they cannot be controlled or redirected, they're removed. The threat is eliminated, and then the narrative is controlled. The official stories are presented, the case is closed, inconvenient questions are not responded to, inconvenient evidence is not presented, and the American people are told just to trust their government. Well, Donald Trump has been working, I believe, in earnest to deconstruct the deep state. He has made a lot of progress. But folks, I don't think any of us ever thought it would be easy. I was very disappointed when Tulsi Gabbard resigned her position as head of DNI, the intelligence overseeing part of our government. And we've had such great hopes that we would get transparency and that Donald Trump would dismantle the deep state. But, you know, when you go back in time, when CIA Director Richard Helms was called on the spot for having not disclosed or delivered documents that were under a congressional subpoena, he went back to the CIA headquarters and ordered that the documents be destroyed. Well, he was ultimately fined a whopping $2,000. When the punishment came down, people in the CIA lined the hallways to donate $100, $200, $20 to help pay off Director Helms' fine. I think that speaks volumes. Well, when Tulsi Gabbard started declassifying documents that presumably implicated the CIA, here's what happened.
It's just in, John. The CIA just raided Tulsi Gabbard's office. Agents hauled out dozens of boxes, files on the JFK assassination and MK Ultra, the CIA mind control operation, which she was in the process of declassifying. Today's whistleblower said it during his deposition, and Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna confirmed it moments ago.
The reason why this is troubling is, A, there was an executive order that the president had directed the full declassification of JFK, but then also to the MK Ultra files. The CIA famously has said that, you know, all documents were released and other documents had been destroyed. So these are allegedly those documents that apparently never existed.
So that all of this just leaves me with the question of what must we do? And I hate to intervene during the celebration of the July 4th holiday, but and to interrupt the joy. But the fact of the matter is, I am vitally concerned about the future of this country. And I firmly believe that the federal government that governs us is absolutely rotten to its core, as I have repeated here many, many times over the last 4 years. So rather than lulling you into a happy place, I want to alert you to the things that I believe demand our collective attention. So what do we do? Well, history gives us a roadmap. Moral nations have survived immoral governments, but it requires men, Christian men, to step forward. We cannot be intimidated. Charlie Kirk and I discussed that when he came on The Truth before his assassination. Well, I felt for a long time that this tendency to label people racist when certain people or groups don't agree with their ideology is a big manipulation, and I think conservatives have fallen for the manipulation. And everyone is so worried about being labeled a racist that it chills their speech and controls their behavior.
No, that's right. And so one of the things we talk about in the book is that you should care about everything more except one thing: you should care less. You should care less about what the left calls you. You shouldn't care less. It doesn't matter if they call you a racist or a bigot or a homophobe or a misogynist or a colonialist. It means nothing. It has no currency. It has no value. It has no bearing. And to go even a level further, the power that the left currently has over America, more than anything else, is weaponized name calling. It is fourth grade style tactics. Now, they also control the FBI, they control the banks, they control that. But at its core, the cultural power they have is that they can make you stop. They can make you stop thinking, stop working, stop acting, stop canvassing, stop anything if they call you a racist, if they call you a transphobe. Stop giving them that power is what we say in the book. Reject the premise, refuse their terms, and say, no, I really don't care what you call me. It means absolutely nothing to me. And in the book, Right Wing Revolution, we talk about what happens when that actually occurs.
How many more clips do we have?
Falls apart.
Well, Charlie nailed it. And, I've thought a lot about that interview since we did it. And I don't think that we can allow ourselves to be intimidated, not if we care about the next 250 years in this country. And I think we all have to come together and work to preserve our freedom and to re-energize and re-inject morality into our federal government. I think it starts by eradicating the cancer that has most assuredly infected the government. I think Donald Trump is trying, but they aren't going to go quietly or easily. Had a conversation with Dr. Alveda King, which we've played parts of earlier in the broadcast, but on this very notion, here's what Dr. King, one smart lady, has to say.
None of our issues will ever be resolved without the power and guidance of Almighty God. My uncle had more prayers and more sermons than he did famous speeches. A lot of people don't know that. And so that's where the real truth is, that we need the Lord, we need to repent, we need to come together, and then God can truly bless us, and he can truly bless our nation.
And I've called for a cleansing in America. I think all the secrets have to come out. I think they're trying to get them out. But when you look at the fact that Tulsi Gabbard was getting them out, and then she suddenly resigns from her office 2 weeks after her physical office was burglarized and documents that she was declassifying were stolen. It just is proof positive, folks. It is proof positive that we have people operating inside our federal government, namely the CIA and the FBI and probably other alphabet agencies, who are operating outside the bounds of the Constitution and the laws of this country. They must be identified, and they must be held accountable, and they must be removed from their positions of authority. So what can we do? We can pray, but don't put prayer in place of action. Put prayer underneath your action. Vote, and vote like it matters. Get your spouse, your friends, your relatives, fellow parishioners. We all must show up for the midterms and vote. And then you can lead in your home, in your church, in your community. The most powerful thing a person can do is for this nation is to raise children who fear God and love truth. The second most powerful thing that a man can do, or a woman, in your marriage, in your workplace, in your church, and in your neighborhood is to spread the truth. So can a moral nation survive an immoral government? Yes, but only if its moral people refuse to become immoral themselves. Only if they refuse to grow cynical, silent, or comfortable. Only if they remember who they are and whose we are. And that is the truth.